Hi, I'm Mary Gilkerson. I'm welcoming you here today, and I'm going to be doing a demo for you that outlines the 7-step system that I'm using for jump starting a painting and coming up with a very strong structured composition. So let's jump right on in and get started. Thanks. So here we have the colors that I'm going to be using to paint today's painting. And I have here Gamblin's Flake White Replacement. And you'll notice that there are actually three blues. We have Ultramarine Blue French, Ultramarine Blue, and Phthalo Blue. You always want to have a warm and a cool of each of the colors. So here I have Ultramarine Blue that is a little bit redder, Phthalo Blue that it's a little bit greener. Then I'm going to be using two greens, neither one of them straight out of the tube, Permanent Green and Italian Terre Verte. Then we also have a dye color called Egyptian Violet that is basically dioxazine purple. Two warm pure colors, Indian Yellow. Actually, they're not pure, both pure. Indian Yellow is. Indian Yellow is basically the same pigment that goes into Hansa Yellow. If you look on the back of it, it is diarylide yellow, almost exactly the same pigment, but in a much more transparent, pure form. From that, you can mix almost any yellow that's out there. It's my go-to yellow. The last color I have on here is Monserrat Orange, which is a convenience color of sorts. It is a mixture of the diarylide yellow and naphthol red and white. I use it so much that it is worth it to me to have it already mixed in a tube. Another color that I may add just a little bit of to intensify and lighten up some of the greens is Cinnabar Green Light. And you see that right here. Very intense, very light yellow-green from Williamsburg. Okay, so we're going to start mixing the colors that I'm going to be using in today's painting. And again, it's always a good idea, especially if you're fairly new or to color or the least bit hesitant about it, to mix the palette before you get started so that you can see if the colors are going to interact well together. So what I'm going to do is start with the blues. Since the photograph that I'm working from is predominantly sky and the evening sky, so it has a whole range of blues in there, as does any sky. There are way more blues than most people realize. So I've got here, I'm going to squeeze out around 5 or 6 sections of white. There are going to be different variations on blue. So we have 6 different sections of white, and we're going to have a different blue, a different cloud color or sky color for each one. Now the top of the sky at this time of day, which is moving towards evening, twilight, is a real intense blue. As the landscape becomes more subdued and goes into shadow, the color of the sky will intensify. So this first initial color is going to be a really intense blue. We're going to actually exaggerate that intensity just a hair, just a little bit. That's still a little on the darker side, so I'm always looking back at my reference or observing in the landscape and checking for value, for intensity, and for hue. So I'm going to take some of that other white and add it in there to bring that value back up just a little bit. One of the other things that will notice is that it's not also pure blue. There's a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of warmth to it coming from a little bit of yellow, so it's slightly green. So we'll squeeze out some Indian yellow. And one thing I want to point out right now is that I've got the dye colors in specific places. So you'll see up here the original blues I'm mixing from. Phthalo Blue, Ultramarine Blue, Ultramarine Blue French, and Dioxazine Purple. And then I've got the Indian Yellow down here, and I'll be putting Monserrat Orange next to it. One of the reasons I do that is I have a tendency to stick my elbow and my wrist into the paint. So I hide those colors from myself so I don't end up with phthalo blue all over the house. Because they're in the same place all the time, then I know where they are and I'm not randomly sticking my knife around to mix color. So it's going to take just a tiny little bit of this Indian yellow, which you can probably barely see there, to green up that blue just a little bit so that it's not quite as pure a blue. Phthalo is not entirely pure anyway. Ultramarine blue is the closest one to being pure, but even it is not entirely pure. So I'm going to mix that in really well so I don't have any yellow streaks floating through my blue. And try to keep it in a fairly neat pile so that it is contained. And notice that I'm wiping periodically as I go through so that I'm not getting more paint, polluting one pile of paint with the color from the previous one. Next, I'm going to take the blue that was on that knife, not adding anything else to it yet, to mix a lighter version of that phthalo blue mixture that I just made. You want to always mix at least 3 different values that are fairly far apart of each color you're going to use, and watch that they're different not just in value but also in temperature. So make the lighter ones get a little bit warmer in general, and the darker ones get a little bit cooler. So that right now is the exact same color, lightened up a bit. So I'm going to make it a little warmer and a little greener by adding another tiny little bit of yellow, not much at all, just to green that up a little bit more. I'm not sure how many of you have noticed when you're looking at the sky in the late afternoon and the evening, it's not pure blue towards the horizon line. It actually gets quite green, almost a light teal. So the sky is not pure blue all the way across. So you need to modify that color just a little bit to make it a little bit more green. Now the next color that I'm going to make is that same color lightened up even more. So again, notice I'm taking just the paint that was on my palette knife and adding it to the white. So that I'm going to get my lightest of the phthalo blue mixtures. You notice how far apart they are in value. And this is going to be the warmest one. It's going to have another tiny little bit of yellow added to it. And that almost went too much, which is not a bad thing for you to see. If you add too much of a color like that, a dye color, it's really easy to do. You want to stop right then and there because it's not going to get any better. I could keep mixing that and it's just going to become more and more and more of a mess. So what makes a whole lot more sense is if you make a mistake, if it goes a little too dark, a little too light, goes the wrong direction, pull it off. Redirect. And what I'm going to do is mix again. That paint up there is not going to be wasted, not at all. I need some more white in there. Because I'm going to take that instead of dipping into the yellow again. There we have a nice light pale blue. And I'm going to take some of that. There we go. That's what I was going for. And it is a very pale green that will be the transition from the darker to the light for that phthalo blue mixture. Now, one of the other colors that we have in the sky is the color that you're going to see right at the horizon line. At that time of day, especially in this situation, because there were a lot of clouds moving in and out, distant thunderstorms, distant thunderheads, the sky at the base, where it meets the land, it's actually darker, which is counterintuitive for most people. They tend to paint what they think they know instead of what they see. And if you'll look at that image again for a minute, you'll see that at the bottom of the sky, where it meets the land, that blue has become darker than the blue immediately above it. So we need to mix something that is darker than this and actually a little bit different blue than this. So we're going to mix that with ultramarine blue and white, which is going to give us a blue that is closer in value to that middle or dark one. I'm getting ready to darken that up just a little bit more. And then we're going to have to figure out how to make it speak to those other blues so it's not quite so different or so strange. You notice right now there's a huge contrast there between these two blues. We don't want it to be quite that strong. So I'm going to reach over here, grab just a little bit of that phthalo blue and add it in here so that it becomes a little bit more harmonious. They relate to each other just a little bit more. I'm going to take a little bit of that mistake. See, I told you it wasn't really going to be a problem. Add that in. Again, making this blue a little bit closer in relationship to that green. There we go. Now notice that that blue is not that different in value from the original blue that I mixed for the very top of the sky. It's a little lighter, not a whole lot. So they're close in value, but very different in temperature and a little different in hue. And the next color we're going to make is the color for the clouds. The clouds in this particular part of the landscape, that angle of light at that time of day, are not what people normally paint clouds as. People tend to paint clouds with black mixed with white to make gray, or with pure white. Clouds are almost never ever gray or white. They reflect the light that is around them, so you need to look at what else is in the sky. In this case, the cloud is reflecting a lot of the same color as that, a little bit more purpley. So I'm going to take some of the Ultramarine Blue French, mix it in with the white right here to begin to make my dark cloud color. I'm not going to leave it purely Ultramarine Blue French because that's a much redder blue, and it's too big a contrast to the other blues that I have on there. Contrast is good, but you want to control it. It needs to go darker, and then it's going to need to go a little bit more towards this color, but a darker value. So the way I'm going to take it darker is I'm going to take Ultramarine Blue, mix it in with the French Ultramarine Blue. And remember, they are not the same color. Ultramarine Blue is a much purer blue. French Ultramarine tends towards the purple. So now I have a very intense, darker, really rich looking blue that is the color of the wisps of clouds that are in silhouette against the sun. And I may need to add just a little bit more ultramarine. Get it a little darker even than that. Because remember, one of the things you want to do when you're painting is to push the values apart just a little bit, push the hues apart just a little bit, and push the temperatures apart a little bit. Now I'm going to take some of that same blue, what was on my knife, and I'm going to mix one lighter value of that, because I may indeed need some of that to give myself a light cloud blue in relationship to those clouds, those particular clouds. The color of the clouds is going to be dependent on how they're angled towards or away from the sun. So there we have our blues. Just as with the blues, we want to have a range of values, intensities, and temperatures for the greens. Now the landscape, the land itself in this section, the sun is going down, so there's very little contrast in the greens on the landscape. We're going to push them apart just a little bit, but not as far apart as you might think. So again, I'm going to start with about 4, maybe 5. We'll come back and see if we need any more different greens, because we want to vary between dark and light, warm and cool, and we want to have the full range of both of those. This particular green is Italian Terre Verte, and it's a color I use as a base color for almost all my greens. It's a good, natural looking earth color, believe it or not. That's a mineral, not a dye color. It is a good receiver for other colors. It's really easy to mix lots of other things with it and to modify it, and it still has a good body. The color that I usually mix for the underlying color for doing the no tan is a sort of greenish purple, depending on the time of year. In the winter time, it tends towards more purple, veers towards purple. In summer, it veers a little bit more towards blue-green. But I'm going to start with the purple, and you saw how little I put in there to make a difference, a very small amount. It doesn't take much at all. That Egyptian violet, or if you are using dioxazine green, purple, is a real strong color. It takes very little of it to turn something purple, kind of an eggplant color. Now, because this is a summertime image, I'm going to add some ultramarine blue. Notice I'm adding a lot more ultramarine blue than I did with the dioxazine. It's not as strong. It doesn't tint quite as much. So it takes more of the blue to impact that mixture right there. So now what I have is a really strong, deep, cool color that will read for the shadows in the landscape. So mix it just a little bit more. And as I did in the other areas with the sky, although I'm going to take some of it off here because it really will change it fast. I'm going to take what is on the knife, and you can see how little that is. Very little. It's like a smear of color on the back of the knife. And I'm going to use that to knock back the edge on that mound of green just a little bit, so it becomes a little bit more natural. Not much at all. You can see how little it takes to make it less intense and a little darker. It is better to add it slowly than to add it too fast. So you see how very slowly I'm going on darkening that up. But I want a really nice, deep, dark green. That's the color that's going to go on top of that dark bluish purple color that I mixed. And when they're next to each other, you can tell the difference between them. Now, the next color I'm going to mix is going to be a little bit lighter. Just a hair lighter. And to lighten up that Terre Verte, I'm going to take just a tiny little bit, put it over here, of the Cinnabar green. You can see how bright and intense it is over there. It's another one of those dye colors. Doesn't take much. Tread carefully. Don't add too fast. I want to lighten that up just a little bit. So you notice I'm not adding white. Instead, I'm adding a lighter green that is still just as intense. And it takes very little of it to lighten that up. Okay, so that's going to be my warmer, lighter green. Now the next green I want to mix up is, take one that's a little step up. There, that's a little greener. I want to have several very subtle different greens. So I added just a little bit of my sort of blue-green mixture to that to make it a more pure green. So now we have a transition from purpley green to blue-green to almost pure green to lighter green. Now on these next ones, notice I've got less of the green in there because I'm going to add a little different color in here. I'm going to add some Phthalo Blue. And you remember how little Phthalo Blue it takes to change things. So I'm adding phthalo this time, almost pure phthalo, actually it is pure phthalo, to this green to make a really rich, intense blue-green. You can see the difference between the two. You may not be able to see it in mass tone on the palette, but phthalo is more transparent than ultramarine blue. So it's going to give me a different kind of blue-green. Take some of that same mixture, add it to this green, and then this is going to get a little white. And the white it's going to get is some of that accidental green that I mixed up here. Remember I told you it's not a waste. Add that in right here. Because one of the things that you have at that time of day is really subtle streaks of light. And those subtle streaks are much cooler in the evening than they are in the morning. So you wouldn't see that time of day, the light's really low. You're not going to see a sudden streak of yellow right there, but you will see a streak of more blue-green. Now again, notice I'm adding that slowly because it doesn't take very much at all to tint. It's got phthalo blue in there. So right now, here more, that is going to be both a streak of light and almost like the mist that rises off of the land as the air cools and the sun goes down. Happens more in the early summer, late spring, and in the fall than in the summertime, because there's just not as much cool down then, unfortunately. So there you see a really teal blue-green that we're going to be using for that lighter area. If I wanted to have another lighter green in there, I could take some of this. I could add a little bit more Cinnabar and make a yellow green, but at that time of day, like I said, you're really just not going to see very much of that. Okay, so there we have our blues and we have our greens. And in just 1 second, we have one more color that we're going to be mixing. It's the color that you can think of as an accent color. It is going to make all the rest of those colors really come alive because it's such a contrast. And it is going to be made from Monserrat Orange and a little bit of Indian Yellow. This is the side of the cloud that is facing the sun. It's going to be super intensely warm, and because it's being hit by the sun. And one of the reasons I'm adding that Indian Yellow is, again, I want these colors to speak to each other. So I want there to be some similar colors in common that go from one pile to the next. If I left the Indian Yellow out, there would be too much contrast. This would be a little too red to go with the rest of the colors that are on the palette. So you can see it right now. It's a little too pinkish. And watch how much more harmonious that is when I add Indian Yellow to it. And it then begins to relate and speak to the sky colors and to the greens. So there we have our accent color. Maybe a tiny little bit more pink. Intensify it just a little bit. There we go. So that's going to be the cloud color, the face of the cloud that is catching the light of the sun. So the last color that we're going to mix over here for the greens is we need one green that is a transition from this green to this green. So we will have a dark but intense green that we have on here. And I mix that from Italian Terre Verte and a little bit of permanent green. And permanent green is one of those dye colors, so it sits to the side. Doesn't take much at all. It's like the Indian Yellow. So I'm going to take about that much permanent green and mix it in here with the Italian Terre Verte to get an intense dark green, the color of new grass or new growth in shadow. So it's a really intense dark green. And again, don't forget, wipe your knife. Now that we have our greens and our blues and our accent color, we're almost ready to start painting. Okay, so the first color that we're going to lay in is that dark purpley blue undercolor. It is the color that's going to define where the no-tan is. Remember, the no-tan is the relationship of the lights to the darks. So one of the reasons I like to use the panels mounted on the foam core board is so I can paint all the way to the edge and turn it as I go. So you'll see me turning the board as I'm working some. I'm going to try to minimize that since we're filming so that it doesn't get too dizzying as I twist and turn around. But you'll notice me working from different angles at different points. Now this tree line is the first thing I'm going to put in where the earth meets the sky, that horizon line. And that dark color I'm going to keep fairly thin. And one of the things that happens, because this is a hill, it'll get, that horizon line is not going to be absolutely straight. Now, one of the reasons to keep this thin is so that I can work the lighter colors back into it and not lose everything that's underneath there. The other area that has a lot of super dark colors is right here at the bottom, super dark values. And one thing to keep in mind is you don't have to worry too much if you get out of the, you're coloring outside the lines, because you can adjust that later. It's much easier to go lighter than it is to go darker. So with oil paint working a la prima, you're going to go dark to light. So I want to keep this as thin as I can. This is basically an underpainting in essence. It's that first layer working out the no tan. Remember I said there's a light streak in here, so I'm leaving a little space there for that. I'm not putting that darkest color underneath there, mainly so I can remember where it's going to be. I could cover that whole area, but then I would lose some of that compositional arrangement. You can draw your composition off first with oil paint and something like a number 2 brush, or you can use the knife to draw it off. You should never use pencil. The oil in the paint will dissolve the graphite and you'll have one unholy mess, so don't do that. Draw it off with paint, either with a knife or with a brush. I've done this often. I don't really do too much drawing off ahead of time first. I just block it in big, large shapes. So remember, we're going to go dark to light, back to front, big general to specific, from large to small. So now that I have the basic blocked in shape of the earth there, notice how simple it is. I'm going to turn the board upside down so I can get the color that is next to the land worked in there. Remember, that's our Ultramarine Blue. That is going to be right here, moving right up against the trees on the horizon line there. And again, even with the blue, I'm going to keep that fairly thin because I want to be able to interact here with the purple and go back and forth, do what I call dancing a bit. And I don't want to have too much blending going on. So if I keep it thin, I can do that without pulling too much of the purple up into the sky. A little bit won't matter because there's going to be an even darker value right here. Now I can come back and modify that line, so I don't want you to spend too much time being finicky over where that blue hits there. Now the next blue going up was on the right hand side, that very lightest blue, and then the middle turquoisey blue, the phthalo blue mixture, and then at the top the darkest phthalo blue. And one of the reasons I said there's 2 here is that sky doesn't just change colors from top to bottom, it also changes from left to right. So I want to take this down into that blue a little bit and leave the edge rough to mimic a little bit the way that cloud edges actually look. Now that is going to be probably it for the lighter blue. I'm going to come back in and do more blending on this in just a minute, but right now I'm just blocking in. And that next blue goes over here on the left-hand side of the painting. And I can turn and pull my knife and begin to blend that some. And I don't have to blend completely. Let some of the colors show through. Then it's going to take some more of the middle turquoisey blue. Begin to work it in over here. Keep a light touch if you're working with knives. Light touch with the brush even. You're not trying to blend all of the marks out. Let some of that texture show through. If it begins to go a little too dark, you can always go back to that lighter value and work some of it in. If you get a nice little pull like that, leave it. Let it be part of the sky. Let it begin to build up some of the kind of cloud relationships you see in there. Then last, at the top, I get some of that dark, that really dark turquoisey blue. The real phthalo blue intensity of that evening sky. Now, it is not going to stay that phthalo in the end. It will have some of the lighter blue pulled across it. But again, wipe that brush or wipe that knife. Either one that you're using, be sure to keep it clean if you're moving from color to color. Now what I'm going to do is go for that in-between phthalo blue, and I'm going to pull that in here. Begin to blend it up here some so that I have more of a transition going on. And again, don't over blend. Stop before you think you should. Because you probably should, you just don't realize you should yet. Most of us overpaint. You want to leave some of the painting to be completed in the viewer's mind. Do not give them every little detail. You do not need to spell it all out. That begins to hit the viewer over the head with a baseball bat. Not what we want to do. We want to intrigue the viewer, give them a little bit of information, make them look harder. Not overkill. If you have to pull across something you thought was terrific, don't be afraid of that. You can always get more terrific sections later. Okay, there I have a real loose transition there. Again, I'm not going to overwork that yet because I have some other clouds coming in. I'm going to go back here though and blend this very top section just a little bit, because that's the section that is going to be the most open blue. Notice I'm holding the knife almost flat. Now I want to pull a little bit of that lighter blue back in as clouds. So remember, the clouds echo and capture the light that's around them, so the colors should not be that different from what's already there in the sky. So I'm going to pull that across a little bit right in here and get a little hint of a cloud right there that moves across. And then I'm going to do the same thing, pulling it up into there. Wipe again. Wipe more often than you think you need to. It's the only way to keep your colors pure and not have them turn into mud. Now one of the last things we'll do at the end in the sky is to pull in some more of the ultramarine blue over on this side for clouds, and the very dark blue purple over on this side for clouds. Before I get to that point though, I don't want to finish the whole sky, I want to get to the land. So we'll do that in just a minute. So now we're going to jump in here and we're going to work on the land itself. Get the trees and the field blocked in. We've got the basic darks down there already. We're going to still, though, follow that rule. Work from dark to light, back to forward, background to foreground. And we're going to keep a range of values going in there. So first, I'm going to turn it so I can pull paint for that tree line up. Makes an easier transition. Then we'll work on this lower half. So I'm going to turn that so it's easier to manipulate the paint going into the trees. And again, we have a change from left to right. It's darker on the left and cooler, a little tiny bit lighter and a little tiny bit warmer on the right hand side. That again is because of the light of the sun as it's going down. So we're going to use some of this darker, more blue-green mixture here. And it is going in this section of the trees. And I'm just pulling that color straight up. It's a little thicker than what's underneath. If I bloop into the sky, I can pull some of that out in just a little bit. It's not an issue. In fact, I want to do a little bit of that to break up that tree line some so it's not quite as regular. I'm going to let some of the blue-purple underneath show through. And again, don't worry about it if you catch a little bit of the sky because that can be wiped. And, oops, that paper towel has become nasty. See, I keep a stack of them over here. There's a reason for that. You don't want to have like a light value suddenly get mixed up into your darks. Dull your colors out. So then I'm going to pull a little bit more of that up. Okay, that is the dark undertone. Then I'm going to take some of this Terre Verte that had just a tiny little bit of the blue mixed in there. And you'll see how much lighter it looks when it's in mass tone, right? Not in mass tone, but pulled out right there. That's the slightly lighter green that is going to go over here on the right hand side. Remember, we're upside down right now. And I'm just going to barely kiss the board with that. And I'm going to stop. So you do very little, so that it just begins to edge over. Then the next color that I'm going to work with is that same darker blue-green. Let's see, first I need to get that texture there. It's a little too much. Blend it out. I'm going to get that darker blue-green, and it's going to go here almost in a straight line across because the shadows move across. It's the shadow area of the grass. So it goes, I'm going to go a little higher. Again, I'm applying it really thinly. Same thing whether it's a brush or a knife. Then, and I'm blocking in. Think of it as icing a cake. When you're working a la prima, you're working from thin to thick, dark to light. You don't want to have the knife pull up all the paint that's underneath. I'll show you what I mean. If I do that, it's going to make it really light. It'll pull up all of that undercolor that I had there. Okay, that's going to be the darkest dark underneath there. And I can soften the edges up here at the top. You'll notice that there are breaks in there that let the blue underneath show through. That's a good thing. It enriches the surface. Then we're going to go to our lighter green. It's not going to be the lightest one we're going to use on there, but it's the intense green. There is less of it over here and more of it on the right. So guess which side I'm going to start on? You're right. I'm going to start over here on the right-hand side. And again, it's forming almost a line. So since the hill goes up right here, it's going to be higher. So as I pick more paint up, I'll wipe off my knife. Now on this side, I'm actually going to blend that a little bit because there's much lower contrast over there. Remember, the land is not as obvious, not as strong in contrast at that time of day. Okay, so we're going to bring some more of this down a bit. And keep that mark irregular so that we've got some blending going on in there. Visual blending rather than us actually mixing the paint. So there's a transition there. Now, as I look at that, I might want to intensify that green in a few areas so I can add a little bit more permanent green to the mixture I've already made. So adjust as you go, just a little bit. And then I can use that slightly more intense one in the area as it gets up the hill. Again, I'm not worried too much about that section because that is where the more blue-green is going to go. So it's going to be covered a little bit. So the light is strongest up here on the land. So then we're going to get this very light teal. And I'm not getting much on the knife at all. Very little. A little bit more than that, but not much. That is going right here. and a broken line. If it's not broken enough, I can go back and break it up a little bit more. But that is the lightest color that's going to be down there in the land. Now, one thing I want to do before I go too much further is look here at that tree line and see if it needs to be adjusted anywhere. There's one spot where it's pulled up a little bit right there that I want to fix just a bit. And that's fairly easy to do by doing what I call dancing back and forth with the knife. So I'm going to push. Notice I've got the knife turned over. Push down into the blue to pull off the part that's gotten too blended. I don't want to get rid of all of it, but I just want to break that up a little bit. It's okay if a little bit of the underpainting shows through, a little bit of the toned ground shows through. In fact, you kind of want that. Then I'm going to go and get some more of that light blue. And I can come back in here and tweak that edge just a little bit. So where I've pulled off too much of the blue, I can put some back. There again, that's why I said don't worry about it when you're first initially putting it on. You can adjust that. So now we're almost at that tweaking stage. Now what remains is the dark blue cloud here and that towering cumulus cloud that is right in here and here that's catching the light of the sun. So I'm going to do the darkest blue cloud first, and it is that dark, almost violet, blue-violet color. And again, remember I said you're going to pull without overthinking it too much. So just like we did there, I'm going to pull this way in one continuous motion. Now if I had lifted up anywhere in there, it would have left a mark. So I pull it in one continuous motion. I can come back and put a little bit more if I need to. Like right there, it needs a little hair more. I can make that cloud more definite. I can blend it in an area if I need to. But what I'm doing is pulling some of that in. I can then pull some of it out later if I need to. I can go up here and add a little bit more of that blue on top of there. Now one of the things I don't want it to do is to stop too abruptly right smack dab in the center. So I'm going to dance back a little bit with the other knife and pull some of that out and define those clouds just a little bit more now that I've established the basics, wrong knife, with the bigger knife. Then I can go to my smaller knife and I can pull that over. If I start getting too much of a mark, I can always go back, pull with the knife, flatten it back out. If I want to carve back out here and get some of that blue, all I have to do is pull it off with the knife. Now that edge up here becomes a little too hard there, so I'm going to have to take the knife and tweak it a little bit. May need to get some of that lighter blue and pull back in here, like that. So it's a dance back and forth between the lights and the darks. So pull off some of that darker blue, play back into this shape a little bit more. Take some of the lighter blue, bring it in. make this a little bit more irregular. If it streaks a little bit, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It just blends a little and breaks up what had become too regular a shape. This is still reading as a little too regular because it's the same width all the way across. So one thing I can do is soften these edges a little bit. I'm blending a little bit. Which then pulls this out a little more. I can also take some of the darker sky blue and go back in here, add it on top in a way that breaks that shape up a little bit more, which is what I'm still going to do here to again make the shapes vary a little bit in width. You don't want too much sameness. And since the clouds are really providing the main focus for the painting, you want to make sure that there's still lots of varied interest going on in here. And I'm going to add some smaller sections of that dark blue up here. And again, I'm holding the knife almost flat and pulling. Just letting it barely catch. And I'll get a few more that scatter in something that's not approaching a pattern. You don't want to get too patterned on there. Get some more of that lighter blue. So if it begins to become too much of a pattern, you can break it back up again. Break it back up again. Break up the shape, enrich the surface, add more visual interest. Now we're almost ready over here to add that big cumulus cloud. I'm going to go back to the big knife as I start to pick up paint on my board. Not a good idea. Trying not to wear paint while I'm painting. So I'm going to hold the knife in a slightly different way to make more of a angular, kind of triangular shape there. So that cloud goes right in this area. So I'm going to hold the knife in a way that's going to help create that shape. And I'm going to put more pressure on the top than on the bottom. And again, I'm just basically blocking that shape in because I can come back and tweak it and blend some. What I don't want to do is have it stop and start too much just in the center. So I get it down, and then I can go back and do the dance. Like right here. Pull some more of that pink out so that you can see the blue underneath. And this is going to be a little too thick for right there. Because this will go up a little higher. And you're going to want to let the knife do some of the work for you with the direction that you're making the mark. So that cloud is towering upwards, so you want to make a mark that goes that direction. So you really won't see very much of that original knife mark at all in the end. And I need to pull this way because right here it's bending. Bending and blending actually. So as it moves westward, it blends. And again, I want to pull it further so that we don't have anything stopping and starting completely right there in the center. So I'm actually going to pick up a little more pink and pull it a hair further so that we don't have that blending happening just in the middle. So here now we've got some nice value variation going on and some nice changes in hue, intensity, and color right there. And it's beginning to look like that towering cumulus, as you can see here. Now the other section that needs a little bit more blending and actually a little removal is right here. A little too much pink. Now there is another towering building thunderhead right here. All it takes is tweaking that just a little bit to have it show. Now I want to move this from being quite as blocky, blend a little as we go, and then go back and get some pure of that warm mixture. You'll notice there's a light area that comes here and a light area that comes here that actually goes right behind those trees. So in order to get that, I'm going to have to come right down here with my knife and go whoosh, pull it up. So I've got to bring it right to that edge and not bear down too hard. If I bear down, then it begins to blend. So keeping it flat, having enough paint on there is crucial. Not picking up everything else that's underneath. And I'll let it start blending a little bit over here as it moves away. Then there's another part of it that dips down right here, but not quite as far. So what it's doing is it's popping down and then popping back up. And if I want to put some more pure color on top of there now, I can take my bigger knife. I can go back in now. And I can leave a bigger mark on top of it. It gives you that feeling of the towering cloud. Now for a visual balance, we're going to want to have a little bit of this somewhere else over here. Maybe even up here, a little of that warmth where it's going to look too different. So we're going to figure out where we want to put a little bit of that, and I'm going to put a tiny little bit here and another tiny little bit up there, but it's going to be a very small amount and it's going to blend just a little bit. So tweak it in just a second. So I put it on there. And I'm going to come back over here, pull this sideways, and decide how much of that I really want to tweak. Probably not a whole lot. So I'll get some of that middle blue. I'm just going to barely kiss it so that there's some of that pink in there to help pull your eye up there, but not so much that it's going to end up being too strong and it'll pull like a suction cup up there or anything. Next I want to get the last little bit of that lighter blue. And I'm going to do some of the same things here that I did over there with the towering cloud. I'm tweaking now. You can tweak and over tweak too, so watch for that. But you tweak to redefine those shapes, make them work better. It's almost a little too hard edged, so I can go back, soften that edge a little bit. I can pull a little bit of the ultramarine blue that I used across that cloud band so that it's not the most definite thing there. So you have a dance and an interaction between the light and the dark. Take some of that ultramarine blue and go back over here and pull it up into there. So it begins to break that shape up a little bit more. Again, so that you're adding some more visual drama there. You can look back and forth at what you've got in the photograph and decide where else you might need to define anything. There's a faint little hint of some of that warmth over in here. And I mean really faint. So I'm actually going to mix a little bit of that ultramarine blue and some of that warmer color so that it's already pre-mixed, which basically gives you a neutral. And I'm going to add just a hair of that. Then I'm going to go back and tweak it. So we're breaking it up a little bit more. And one of the last things I want to do is add a tiny little bit of this green that I made into the cloud. Break up that mass of pink just a little bit. And there we have it. Last thing I always do, sign it. I sign with a nail and scratch through. It's less obtrusive. It's quick, it's easy, and it's dirty. Not dirty, but it's quick and easy. So there you have it. There's our finished painting. And we'll look at it a little bit more closely in just a second. And I just want to thank you all for joining me here today. It's been a pleasure sharing my painting system with you, and I hope you get a lot of benefit out of it. And if you have any questions, absolutely any at all, be sure to email me through my email at mary@marygilkerson.com or send me a question through my website contact info. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you sometime in the future. Thank you.